back. I hope you all had enjoyed your lunch. Now we will be starting our fifth session of the conference, which focuses on institutions. This session will be chaired by Mr. Farhan Aziz Khawaja. Mr. Farhan Aziz Khawaja is a PAS officer having a master's degree in history and LLB and a diploma in international relations. He has a vast experience of serving in different departments of Government of Punjab. He has also served as District Coordination Officer Okada, Additional Secretary, Home Department and Director of Home Defense. He has also worked as Secretary, Labour and Human Resource Development and Commissioner Social Security. His areas of expertise in training are introduction to public sector management, model of modern management and new public management. He is currently serving as Director General of Civil Service Academy. Over to you, Mr. Khawaja.
Thank you, Madam, and I would, at the outset, I would like to thank the Lahore School of Economics, Lahore School of Economics and the International Growth Center, specifically Dr. Azam Chaudhary and Dr. Naveed Ahmed. It is such a pleasure an honor to be here. We have been in the past working together, and it was great to be a part of today's first session. I believe that both the areas that are being papers are going to be presented and talked about, the NGOs and their effectiveness. They are one of the most critical areas for the federal and provincial governments, as many of the programs of the government are now being delivered through NGOs, and unlike the past, the government acknowledges the NGOs to see that where the various programs have been affected, which have been designed to that. So that would be great, and I'm looking forward to hearing that. The second area is also of great interest to the public policy managers and the government, because corruption is such a challenging and systemic and endemic issue with the government and at various levels, and both in the policy corridors and the implementation part. The government is greatly concerned about rent-seeking, patent-client relationships, etc., etc. So we are looking forward that what have to add and to say about that, and we will be looking forward to it. So I hope the findings and conclusions from both these papers would add value to the general knowledge of the particular discipline, but more importantly for somebody like us in the government, a very important. Thank you. I think we can start off.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sachi. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Sarah Shawkat. I am a PhD candidate in economics and public policy at Dhaka University. Today, I will talk about my paper on the effectiveness of NGOs using evidence from Pakistan, and this is joint work with Atiku Rahman, who is a PhD student at the University of Delaware and is also here with us today. So we know that NGOs often step in and contribute towards poverty alleviation in the communities that they serve. And in fact, over the past several decades, there has been a shift from government-led to private-led development. And this has resulted in an increase in the number of NGOs across various countries, especially in the developing world. So just to quote a few numbers, in Kenya, for example, there has been this increase in the number of NGOs from a few hundred to over 8,000 between 1990 and 2012. Similarly, in Bangladesh, by 2005, there was at least one NGO in 90% of the villages. So India and Kyrgyzstan have seen similar increases in NGO activity. But despite this boom in NGO presence in these countries and various others, there is a lack of causal evidence on the effectiveness in delivering essential services and developing society in general. In our paper, we aim to bridge this gap in existing literature by investigating the causal effect of NGOs on relevant outcomes, and we do that using a unique natural experiment in the context of Punjab, Pakistan, and I'll talk about this natural experiment in a couple of slides. So coming to our research questions, first we investigate the effects of NGO activity on the use of essential services such as education and healthcare, and we see how these effects differ by gender and by the urban and rural status of individuals or households. Second, we see whether and to what extent does government provision substitute for NGO services in delivering essential services. And lastly, we study broader impacts. So what are the effects of NGO activities on broader community level outcomes? And the outcomes we consider are economic development in general, public discontent which we measure through demonstrations and riots, and social issues as well, such as violence against women. We answer these research questions, as I mentioned, in the context of Punjab, Pakistan. And the type of NGOs that we are studying in this paper are small-scale local NGOs, which typically rely on donations from community members. These are different from international NGOs, so these are different from Save the Children or BRAC, and so different from NGOs that rely heavily on foreign donations. So just to look at a few examples, here we have the first photo of an NGO-run clinic, and the second one is a small NGO-run primary school. We can see that they're pretty small, have very simple basic infrastructure, but they have been set up to provide essential services to the communities they serve. In order to estimate the effectiveness of NGOs, a naive approach would be to regress development outcomes, such as the school, on the number of NGOs in a region. However, the OLS estimates that we would get would be biased, as we know. There are issues such as selection bias. Regions with a higher number of NGOs may be different from regions with a lower number of NGOs. And to deal with such issues, we exploit an exogenous change in the number of NGOs in Punjab, Pakistan, and this is a 25% decrease in the number of NGOs. And this decrease was basically driven by Pakistani government's efforts to comply with the Financial Action Task Force action plan to delist the country from its grey list. And I'll explain what that means on the next slide. So the Financial Action Task Force is an intergovernmental body that was set up by the G7 in 1989 to combat money laundering and terrorist financing in the world. And what it does is it identifies countries with weak measures to combat money laundering or terrorist financing, and it places them on a grey list. And this is what happened with Pakistan in June 2018, as Pakistan was grey listed by FATF. One of the concerns that is relevant in our setting and for our paper is that FATF was concerned that NGOs are being misused. And when that happened, the Pakistani government initiated a domestic review and it requested local NGOs to submit their financial documents. And this was communicated to the NGOs via a newspaper advertisement rather than sending them direct letters. So what happened was that local NGOs were either unaware of this requirement, they missed the newspaper advertisement, or they did not have the requested financial documentation that was requested. As I mentioned before, these are typically small-scale NGOs and they typically rely on registers for record keeping. So the NGOs that failed to comply, did not submit their financial documents, were deregistered by the provincial governments, and this shock I would refer to as the deregistration shock in the rest of my presentation. And as I mentioned, around 25% of the NGOs were deregistered due to this shock. In our paper, we exploit the quasi-random variation in this deregistration across various fields, which are basically regions smaller than districts in Punjab, Pakistan. So we use data from multiple sources in our paper. In the interest of time, I'll briefly mention some of them. So we have non-public data on NGOs from the Punjab Social Welfare Department and the Federal Board of Revenue. Then we use household level surveys, the PSLM surveys. We have animal healthcare information from the Punjab Development Statistics. We use nightlights data to show the effect on economic activity. Then we use the athlete data set, that is where the demonstrations and riots data comes from. Then we have some other non-public data, which is on the women's shelter homes, locally known as Darul Aman, and then we also have the 47 census data to get population rates. So using the first set of data that I mentioned, we construct the deregistration shock for the deciles. So by the deregistration shock, I mean the proportion of NGOs that are deregistered in each decile. And this is how the variation in the deregistration shock looks like across deciles in Punjab. We can see that there is ample variation, and this is the variation that we leverage in our paper. So estimation methodology is the event study analysis. When our outcome is at the individual level, we have used this estimating equation where yi, and t is an outcome for individual I in decile L and time t. We have a bunch of different outcomes that I will show in a few minutes. Then NGO L is our treatment variable. It is the decile level intensity of NGO deregistration. We have two versions of this treatment variable, a continuous one and a binary one. So the continuous treatment variable is just the proportion of NGOs that were deregistered. The binary treatment variable, it equals 1 if the proportion of NGOs deregistered for that decile is higher than the median and 0 otherwise. We also will have decile-based effects, time-based effects, some individual level controls, cluster the standard errors at the decile level. We also include survey rates with relevant. We also have, or use difference and difference in our paper, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail of this methodology. Okay, so moving on to the results. The first step is to show the first stage, and here we show the effect of the decrease in NGO activity. So if you look at column 1, we can see the treated deciles, where more NGOs were basically deregistered, have around 10 fewer NGOs. So this effect is obviously mechanical by construction, but it helps to understand the magnitude of the deregistration shock. We also show the first stage with some other outcomes. So here we are looking at the likelihood of receiving monetary benefits. And you can see, we are showing the results through event study plots, and you can see that after deregistration, which are the red lines, there is a decrease in the likelihood of receiving monetary benefits, especially in the case of PNC, which are rural individuals. We also look at the amount of monetary benefits received, and we see similar results. For example, if you look at PNC, which is for individuals in rural areas, we can see that there is around a 750 PKR decrease in the receipt of monetary benefits after the shock and treated deciles. We also show our first stage, this variable, which is where the NGOs install water delivery systems in households, and similarly we are seeing similar patterns, that there is a decrease, and we believe all of this evidence helps us basically say that there is a decrease in NGO activity after the deregistration shock. Next, we look at education outcomes. The first one is attending school at an NGO-run school. Basically, again, we see that there is a decrease after the deregistration by 2020. There is a huge drop in the likelihood of attending an NGO-run school. This is for children aged 5 to 16 years. When we split the sample by gender, we can see that for boys and girls, both that there is a decrease in attending the likelihood of attending NGO-run schools. The effect is larger for girls. I think for girls it's around 15%, for boys it's around 10% decrease by 2020. Then we also split the sample by urban and rural by school type, whether primary, middle or secondary, and again by gender. It's a huge table, so I just highlight the column that I want to focus on. So here in column A, which is for girls going to middle school, you can see that there's a decrease in the likelihood of going to middle schools, more so in urban urban areas but not in rural. Next, we want to understand what happens to these children. Do they substitute with government schools once they leave NGO run schools? And that is what we see. There is substitution with government schools. If you look at the first column, the first row, basically, we see that overall they are not substituting, but they are substituting in urban areas. So we are claiming that there is imperfect substitution. So moving to some health outcomes, first we look at prenatal care. We can see that there is a decrease in receiving prenatal care for pregnant women, especially in rural areas. We look at child immunization for girls, and if you look at the highlighted column 5, you can see that there is a decrease in the likelihood of girls getting vaccinated, and this is especially pronounced in rural areas. There is a 4.4 percentage points decrease. So what is happening in the healthcare sector? We look at the effect on the number of small health centers which are typically run by NGOs, and we can see that after the registration shock, treated disease have fewer small health centers, and this decrease basically sustains even after 2 years after the shock. At the same time, there is an increase in the number of government-run health centers right after the registration shock, but that is just a one-time increase and it falls back to zero. So the government is unable to sustain its efforts once the NGO activity decreases in these treated areas. Next, I'm going to present the broader level results. So the first outcome is economic activity, which we show through nightlife intensity. So if you look at panel B, you can see that after the registration shock, treated areas have a gradual decrease in economic activity. And if we look at public discontent, which we measure through demonstrations and riots, we can see that after a few years, by 2023, there's an increase in the number of demonstrations, increase in the number of riots. And moving on towards violence against women, here we look at the number of victims admitted to female shelter homes. And again, if you focus on panel B, you can see that there is an increase in the number of females admitted to these shelter homes, especially during the COVID-19 lockdown months. You can see that there is an increase or spike in those months. So all of these results basically highlight how important it is to have NGOs in these areas, as they basically contribute towards the economic development of fostering peace in these areas. So to sum up, we have shown in our paper and in the presentation as well that the effective pre-listing of Pakistan and the subsequent NGO registration in Punjab, that is the actual experiment in our paper, it had a significant impact on NGO activity. We established our first stage, there was decreased monetary benefits for households, reduced likelihood of NGOs installing water delivery systems, and then we showed our results, effects on multiple outcomes. We showed that there were high dropout rates from NGO-run schools. This effect was more pronounced for girls and in urban areas. We showed that pregnant women are less likely to receive prenatal care once the NGO activity decreases, and there is evidence that lack of prenatal care can have long-lasting effects or adverse effects for the mother and children. There's a decrease in the likelihood of getting immunization for girls, especially in rural areas. We've also shown that the government tries to fill in these gaps that were left by NGOs, but their efforts are short-term. So overall, our conclusion is that NGOs do matter. They're crucial for economic development, for maintaining peace, public contentment, and reducing violence against women. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to getting your comments and suggestions and feedback.
thanks so much for the great presentation and also for this really great piece of work. I really enjoyed it really, and it's pretty much close to my heart to my work also in this sector, so it's really nice to see these results coming. So in summary, the motivation behind this study, as we just heard, was that despite the big surge of NGOs worldwide and also in Pakistan, there seems to be a lack of causal evidence of effectiveness of NGOs on the promotion of community development. And the biggest methodological contribution of this paper is really identifying or using a natural experiment to really or exogenous decrease in the number of NGOs in the country as a result of these facts pre-listing exercise. That through the use of this natural experiment, actually, we really, or the team, managed to identify causal effectiveness of these NGOs on broad and variety of very interesting outcomes of interest, not just at individual and household level, but also at the community level. So as we just saw results, a variety of, so this deregistration shock basically had a significant and negative impact on NGOs' activities, on household investment in very crucial services like education and health, and on a variety of other important outcomes at the community level. I think I would say probably the most important thing about this study, at least from my perspective when I read it, was really the policy implication of the results. In a world where basically the majority of donors funding is actually channeled, is going to big international organizations and not to smaller NGOs, makes me wonder whether this is the right way we're using our donors' money. So definitely this is the kind of results that I think we need and policymakers also need to potentially adjust the way we use public money. Comments and suggestions. I will be very short and brief here because I really liked the paper. It was really clear, very well done, full of details, very comprehensive. I really liked the consideration, and the smile form is not particularly professional, but I thought it did convey the message very, very, very easily. So what I liked about the paper was definitely the consideration of broader outcomes of interest. So beyond, like looking really at the economic development of the country, or beyond household and individual outcomes, but also really looking at the community level. And to do that, we used also very interesting data sets and very interesting proxies, like for example, night slides, intensity, using GIS data, and many other interesting data sources that are definitely not trivial. And this actually leads to the second point that I found particularly interesting and really, really well done, like a commendable use and analysis of such variety of data sets, very different data sources. A lot of work for sure came into, or was behind this piece of work. We even created a data set starting from the reports on NGOs, digitized the data set, and actually, I think beyond the public good of this paper and the results of this paper, I would say also contributed to the creation of another public good, that is data, potentially available also to the public, hopefully. So really, really well done on that. In terms of potentially ideas for improvement, or at least some questions that I had while reading the paper. So as you rightly mentioned in the paper, you kind of wanted to make sure that the parallel trend assumption was holding, and you used mostly coefficient plots to kind of show this trend that was, there were not particular different trends before the experiment. In that case, I would potentially suggest adding maybe a more effective graph, like really showing a trend line of what was happening before the shock and after. And I really found very useful a paper by Miller 2023, which is actually very recent, and I checked it. It's not in the references, so it may be a good a source of reference for seeing a little bit also, because he suggested a very interesting suggestion on also how to really show graphically this parallel trend if it holds a fixed assumption. So definitely my first suggestion. And second one, I'm wondering, I mean, you kind of described in the paper the potential reasons why the government didn't manage to compensate for the absence of NGOs, or at least they tried, but their efforts were not sustained over time. So I'm wondering whether this was more like kind of reasons that you imagined, or if it was based, or if they were based on anecdotal evidence or interviews with people, and if it's not the case, it would be interesting to actually hear more from community members. What were the reasons also why they didn't make use of the available government services? I'm wondering whether this was mostly a problem of supply side, so it's like a lack really of government public services in the health and education sector, or maybe the perceptions of community members that they perceived these services as not as good as the ones of NGOs. So I think this would also inform potential future work or the current work. So yeah, so this is overall my feedback. So really well done. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We can take a few more questions and I can answer.
Please.
Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed that. So I mean, it's a feedback. I was just going to ask, just not about the econometrics as much, but was there a breakdown in terms of the type of NGOs, what they were actually engaged in? You know, because if I think, your effects on female violence and your effects on, other things, child level outcomes. If you have a breakup, you may not, but if you have a breakup of the sort of NGO, what NGOs were doing, before, and then, what was left afterwards, maybe it was that, there was this, concentration on particular types of NGOs left, which were not interested as much in these topics. So I'd be very interested to know if you had that data, but it's great paper, thank you.
So, when you might use FATF as an exogenous solution, I have some concerns about identification. So, there's a 25% decrease in NGOs. My question is, how do we know those NGOs that were deregistered? How do we know that that's not systematic? Maybe NGOs who are inactive might not have some developments. So to make your causal estimates, to have us more confidence in them, it's very important to show that it's not systematic and it's less than manifest. Secondly, as Farhan has mentioned, that your choice of analysis is at the C level. So that's like a little strange for me, because the treatment is at district level, because these NGOs are registered at district level. On the other hand, the second thing that makes sense is to do it at the UC level, so you have more variation if you are thinking about it in those terms. So yeah, I'm interested to know why at the C level. And lastly, that's just a general comment, that some of your estimates are significant in urban areas. That's exactly what I found in my paper, that rather than intervention impacting rural areas, they're impacting urban areas. So collectively, we need to think what's actually happening on the ground, and urban areas that are more affected by these interventions. Thank you.
And the question, please, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. So you talk about how this impacted the NGOs, but can you elaborate on what the scale of that impact is? In the sense, if you're saying any sort of indicators, you mentioned a few, education, health, and all of those, to what extent was that contribution by the NGOs that it has now left the market? And secondly, could you also elaborate on what percentage of that lost services has been picked up by the government? Secondly, is there a way for you to also see the reverse trend? So if you're saying that the NGOs are rapidly increasing, but at this point they start to decrease, so can you also test how the services were changing when we had an increase in the number of NGOs? Because that would also tell you a lot more about what's actually happening on the ground.
Thank you.
So the first question that I got was on challenges in NGO registration before and after the fatal shock. So we have looked at the registration requirements that the NGOs have to follow. There's a registration fee, there has to be a board of the NGOs. It was pretty easy to register an NGO before Pakistan was listed by FATF. But afterwards, now it's really difficult to register an NGO. There's the EAP, even if you're receiving funding from international bodies, you have to follow a bunch of different requirements. So now it's really difficult, it's become really difficult to register an NGO. And in our paper, we do say that given our findings, government should support registration of NGOs, make it easier for them so that there's an increase in NGO activity. So our unit of analysis is at the sea level. When we started working on this, we started doing this at the district level. But in Punjab, there are only 36 districts, so that really limits our sample size, gives us less variation in the registration as well. So even the data that we have from the NGOs, we have their domain, so we know where they are operating, and we find that around 85% of them operate at the sea level. So even though they are registering at the district level, their activity is at the sea level. That is one of the reasons we do the analysis at the sea level, because that is where the NGO is operating. We don't do it at the sea level, which is a level lower than that, which would have been great, but it's really difficult to identify the DC of an individual in household service, for example, PSLM. The lower we can go is the SE. That is also a reason we're doing this at the SE level. Thank you so much, Nikita, for the discussion. I look at the paper that you cited in your slides regarding the pre-trend analysis graphs. Regarding getting more qualitative evidence on why the government was unable to fill the gaps left by the NGOs, I think that's a great suggestion. We are also thinking about reaching out to the NGOs that would be registered and not to get more qualitative evidence on what really happened, so that's something that we want to do. So type of NGOs, we actually do know the type of NGOs. So we know if an NGO is working towards education welfare or working towards health or women welfare. One thing that I did not mention and which I should have is when our outcome is attending an NGO run school, we are only looking at NGOs that have been set up for education welfare. When we look at health outcomes, we are looking at only health NGOs. So we have tied the outcome with the type of NGOs. And if we just look at the overall NGOs, we don't see the results that we have. And in our paper, we said that is kind of a reverse mischeck. And how do we know that the NGOs weren't already inactive? And that is why they didn't submit the financial records. So the Social Welfare Department in Punjab, they did a check on the NGOs that registered right before the FATF grade listing. And in our data, we know which NGOs are already inactive and take them out. And I think so if we are basically leveraging the variation in deregistration across different SCs, and we don't really believe that one SC would have more NGOs deregistered as compared to another one. We are assuming that the variation across different SCs is in a way random. Urban and rural effects. In our paper, we have a conceptual framework, we have a simple model which we use to motivate the urban and rural effects that we see. We are seeing more effects there for health, rural households around the more concave part of the utility function. So perhaps that would explain the larger effects there. In terms of what percentage of loss was picked up by the government and these NGOs were exited the system. So I showed a few papers in the slides as well, and we have a couple more in our paper where we are basically showing that there is around a 13% increase in likelihood of attending a non-government school. Then at the same time, we show what happens to attending a government school, and we see imperfect substitution. So we see that if there is, for example, a 30% increase in attending an NGO-run school, then there is a 10% increase in attending a government school. And I hope that answers your question. I think I've answered all questions. Thank you so much for all the comments and questions and sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. I would just like to share that the Home Department of the Government of Punjab, the Social Welfare Department, and few others like the Education and the Health Department, because I believe this is a pioneering effort in terms of this paper and some of the very pertinent observations that came about. And I would request all supervisors and IPC for to effect some the observations, findings, and conclusions that have come about through this paper, pre and post. They would be shared with the relevant policy practitioners and the secretaries to the government, because as was earlier suggested, this very unique way of looking at active NGOs pre and post through multiple data sets, and especially the choice of lights and activities, that is something very new in terms of the government. And perhaps because the government has also compiled post-COVID and post-FATF these new data sets, that would greatly help the policy practitioners make those informed choices. So this I hope we are thankful. I would request Madam please.
Okay, so thanks a lot for joining the session today. I'm Nikita Galemai, a PhD student at the University of Istanbul, and today I will be presenting the results of my first PhD chapter, as expected, in collaboration with my supervisors at the UEA and another colleague from the University of Bologna. Okay, so let's start straight away with the motivation behind our study. So the transition to market exchange systems in countries with previously centralized economies like Ukraine, which is the focus of our study, for sure brought about a lot of opportunities for economic development, but at the same time it has also engendered the phenomenon of corruption. Some recent estimates report that corruption costs about $3.6 trillion per year, which is around 5% of the global GDP. And notably, most corrupt transactions are facilitated by intermediaries or middlemen who link up with interested parties, act as a guarantor of the corrupt deal, and also protect the reputation of their clients and reduce substantial transaction costs. However, detecting and punishing corrupt intermediaries in countries with entrenched cultures of rule breaking can be quite challenging. So a complementary approach that has been advocated for by many international organizations recently is to really promote a culture of integrity by equipping younger generations with the right skill set to resist corruption. The problem is that there is really little evidence on the effectiveness of this integrity training. Therefore, our study aims to investigate whether supporting professional intermediaries like lawyers to commit to upholding ethical values can actually prevent or reduce corruption. So to answer this question, we conducted a lab in the field experiment where we randomly allocated offers to 242 students, undergraduate law students in Ukraine, to receive a newly designed integrity training program. So the main objective of the study was to measure the impact of the training on post-training corrupt behavior of the students. And given the complexity, the complex and clandestine nature of corruption, we decided to use a novel experimental bribery game in which law students had to play the role of intermediaries, facing the choice of whether facilitating or not a corrupt transaction, a bribery, between a firm and a public official at the expense of society. Notably, before making their decisions, intermediaries were further randomly assigned to one of two social norm. One group basically received a piece of information saying that they were part of a group of intermediaries in the game that was predominantly integrity trained, whereas the other group didn't receive this information. So this between subject 2x2 design allowed us to measure the impact of the training alone and in conjunction with this descriptive social norm. And it also allowed us to investigate further the psychological mechanisms behind potential changes in corrupt behavior. In particular, we wanted to understand whether any changes in corrupt behavior were mostly due to a change in moral preferences as induced by the training, or due to a change in perceptions about the purposiveness of integrity of the group of reference induced by the information training. So our prior was that the training would have had a different impact depending on the age of students and on how embedded they were in the often corrupt Ukrainian academic environment. Therefore, we analyzed our heterogeneous effects of the training, and indeed, we found that the information treatment alone brought about a large negative reduction by 37 percentage points in the probability of facilitating bribery only among the youngest cohorts, so first-year students. However, the combination of both training and information treatment brought about an increase in senior students' attitudes towards social or shared responsibility and accountability for corruption. So our study, to the best of our knowledge, is the first study that looks at the effects of integrity training on incentivized corruption decisions by a natural population of future transaction intermediaries. Just a couple of words about the field-based intervention. So we designed our integrity program together with our implementing partner, Museum Justice Program, and also 4 local trainers. The training was basically spread across 2 weeks, 12 hours, 6 sessions of 2 hours a week each, and it was based and inspired by the UNODC university models on integrity and business ethics that are peer-reviewed and open source. The most important thing about the training is that it was really aimed at increasing students' ethical awareness and inspiring ethical behavior in an interactive and emotionally invested way. So once we designed the training, then we started advertising the program, and we received about almost 500 registrations from across the country. And we are randomly allocated on behalf of the sample to our treatment conditions. So they received the offer to participate in the training, whereas the other half didn't receive the training offer. Of the 242 students that received the offer, only 145 actually took the offer, so took the training. So attrition was actually a big problem in our study, as I will mention later. So as mentioned, our first primary outcome of interest was corrupt behavior. So we used a novel experimental bribery game that basically was simulating a one-shot interaction between 4 players. So 1 intermediary, 1 firm, 1 public official, and 1 society. Public official and society were totally passive players, so they didn't have to take any decisions, but their final payoff in the game was influenced by the actions of the decisions of intermediaries and the firms. So all 4 players had an initial budget of 70 Ukrainian hryvnia, which at the time, 2021, was about between $2 and $3. The firm wants basically to win a contract from the public official, and they have only a 5% probability of winning this contract. However, the firm has the opportunity to win this contract with certainty only if they pay a bribe to the public official. But the firm doesn't know the amount of this minimum acceptable bribe of the public official. However, the intermediary knows. So in the game, we told the intermediary what was the amount, the minimum acceptable bribe of the public official. This was actually generated by a random number generator, so and the minimum acceptable bribe could take values between 5, 10, 15, and so on up until 40. So the main decision of the intermediary in the game, so the first decision actually, was to decide whether to facilitate bribery or not. So inform the firm about the existence of this bribery, that they could pay this bribe to earn or to win the contract with certainty. And the second decision of the intermediary was how much to actually ask to the firm. They actually could ask the firm whether to pay the true bribe amount of the requested by the public official or a higher amount, and then that's all the difference. So these were the 2 main decisions that the intermediary had to take during the game. The second player, the firm, had to just decide whether they accepted to pay the bribe or not. So the experiment was programmed in Qualtrics and run in an asynchronous online format. So group matching happened ex post once we received all the results from different players. The set of actions of each player actually was common knowledge, so everybody read the same instructions. And in order to reduce experimental demand effect or social desirability bias, we monitor, incentivize all choices. So people actually could win or lose money in this game. And we also avoided morally loaded terms. So we didn't talk about bribes in the instructions, but rather payment, more neutral terms. As mentioned before, also we were interested in investigating the technological mechanisms behind potential changes in corrupt behavior. So the first set of mechanisms was moral preferences, which we measured through our baseline and endline surveys, using mostly the moral foundation theory questionnaire that captures whether people use and value and use in their daily decision making the 5 main universal moral dimensions of care, fairness, loyalty, respect, and sanctity. We also asked some questions about the perceived level of corruption in Ukraine, the risk of being held accountable, and also justifiability of corruption. Our second set of mechanisms were actually the beliefs about ethical behavior of other intermediaries. So at the end of the experiment, we elicited in an incentivized method intermediaries' beliefs about the share of the rest of intermediaries in the game that were willing to facilitate bribery. We also asked them their belief about the average embezzled amount by other intermediaries in the game and the average amount that firms would have been willing to pay at cost. So this table actually summarizes a little bit the 4 treatment groups of our experiment. In total, 252 intermediaries participated in the game. So you can see the sample was quite small. So big attrition problems, and also beyond attrition, we had also quite serious compliance problems in the sense that not all students that received the training offer took it. For example, in the group of 157 students that didn't take the training, 28 of those received the training offer but didn't take it. So to kind of account for selection bias, we estimated our effects using intent to treat estimates first using an loss regression model, and then we also obtained LATE, local average treatment effect estimates using an instrumental variable regression model. And let's just move to the results quickly. So a very, very quick visual inspection of these figures, which represents the share of intermediaries that decided to facilitate bribery in the game between, on the left side, junior students, or first-year students, and the right side, older students. Across the 4 treatment groups, we actually seem to see, like, it looks like a little bit that some negative effects of the training and or potentially the information can be only detected among the junior group. And if you look at the regression table here, the corresponding one, we are showing only ITT estimates at the moment, but just for time constraints, but they were corresponding also to the latter estimates. And we see that here we find a negative significant effect for junior and informed students. So if you were a first year student, informed but not trained, you were much less likely to bribe, or not to bribe, but to facilitate bribery in the game. The effect was statistically significant, 5%, 37 percentage point reduction, which was over 50% almost. In terms of the amount embezzled, actually, again, a quick visual inspection of the figures doesn't really tell us a lot. Probably we see some negative effects on the right side of the figures among senior students and trained. And indeed, the regression table shows us a slightly significant negative effect of training offer on older students. So older students seem to be less likely, or seem to kind of embezzle smaller amounts in the game. And mechanism, let's maybe first start looking at, and I will kind of highlight just the first figure here due to time constraints. But when we look at the mechanism, the first set of mechanisms or beliefs of intermediaries about the pervasiveness of corruption among other intermediaries in the game, we really see here actually that the conditional marginal effect of information, so conditional of being informed, junior students that also received the training offer were basically had much lower beliefs, or their belief about the share of corrupt intermediaries in the game was much lower. So what does it mean? They basically, as a result of information treatment, we managed to adjust their perceptions about corruption in the game, about the integrity, the pervasiveness of integrity training in the group of intermediaries in the game, and therefore adjusting their perceptions and their beliefs, they also adjusted their actual behavior in the game. So they thought that the norm was integrity training in the game, and therefore they were less likely to facilitate bribery in the game. In terms of the other set of mechanisms around moral preferences, to be honest, probably also most likely because the sample was really small at this time. There's only 150 about students participated both in the baseline and in the endline and in the experiment. We didn't find significant effects on moral preferences as captured by the moral foundation theory, but we found some positive effects on older students and trained and also informed victims. A positive effect on their attitudes towards shared responsibility and accountability of corruption. So in conclusion, what we are seeing here is that integrity training alone can have actually the potential to increase the feeling of moral burden, especially among senior students. So it has the potential to change moral preferences, but it alone, integrity training is not enough to really bring about behavior change. So in this case, we would really suggest to complement integrity training with potentially other interventions, behavioral interventions that are also pretty cheap, like for example an information experiment, that could really try and help spread the norm of corruption in society, and therefore gently nudge, especially younger students, to behave more ethically, because they think this is the norm in the society. So this is a little bit the main results of the study, and looking forward to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for this, again, a very interesting and fascinating area. Pakistan is a very dark should be also a really challenge. So I think now Sarah Shaw share her perspective.
norms in combating corruption. I had a great time reading the paper and I'm excited to share my thoughts and feedback on it today. So I'll start off with a brief summary of the paper based on my understanding and reading of the paper. So the research question is, how does integrity training and social norms, how do they interact to reduce corrupt behavior among law students? The context was a field experiment with law students in Ukraine, and this was relevant to Ukraine's corruption challenges, so a very relevant setting for that. The methodology that the researchers used is a 2x2 factorial design, and the two interventions that the paper focuses on is firstly an ethics-focused integrity training program, which also includes exposure to role models and a bunch of different things. And then the second component is peer informational training, whether your peer is also trained via this integrity training program. So the data, they collect data through surveys, which collects information on attitudes, and then there is the incentivized primary rating, which captures information on behavior. So key findings very quickly. So as Anita mentioned, integrity training alone has the potential to improve anti-corruption attitudes, especially for seniors, as she highlighted. Behavior change can be significant when peers are more to be trained as well, and especially true for junior students who are more influenced by these social norms. So some strengths of the paper. Firstly, I really liked reading it. It was about corruption. I'm interested in it. It's very relevant for developing countries. It's a challenge in Ukraine, it's a challenge in Pakistan. So any research that highlights effective policies that can help reduce corruption is obviously very interesting. In terms of the paper, it helps to add critical evidence on the effectiveness of integrity training and awareness in reducing corruption. Another thing that I really like is that it helps to bridge theory and practice by testing interventions in a real-world setting, which will build future legal professionals. It employs surveys as well as a primary reading, so I thought that was an interesting mix of collecting information as well and measuring changes in behavior as well. And I thought that the focus on law students was also very relevant, as law students basically have the potential to influence future legal and government integrity. So I thought that was also very interesting. I have a few comments predisposed, of course, but the first one is about the sample size. You talk about that in your paper and presentation as well, that there are 252 students in the study, around 95 in treatment and 157 in control. We all know the small sample size limits power, but maybe that's not an issue. If there are some power calculations that show that maybe the sample size is enough, I think that would be a helpful addition. If the sample size in fact is small, one suggestion I thought would be to rather than running the long regression specification, maybe just start off by running a simple one, where you regress your outcome on whether an individual was assigned to the integrity training program or not. So just starting off by that rather than splitting the sample into different subsamples and conducting heterogeneity analysis in the main specification as well. Then another suggestion is conducting randomization inference. I haven't done that myself, but I've heard it helps when the sample size is small. So maybe that would be a useful addition. Then when reading the paper, I was also slightly confused on how the 252 number came about. I think maybe it would help to clarify a bit more on that, so that it's easy for the reader to follow. So for example, the paper mentions that there were 496 students, law students to start off with, who agreed to participate in the baseline survey, and around 323 completed the baseline, and then 200 completed the end line. So I was sort of confused how when you start off with 496 open floor, so I was thinking that the 4 groups that it is, maybe the balance checks could be between them to see if the balance sample is balanced. Then we talked about differential nutrition. We mentioned this in the presentation as well. In the paper, I read that the average response rates between treatment and control seem similar when you just look at the averages, but I think if you check for differential nutrition via regression analysis, that would be helpful. And in case if there is, then you can look at key counts. There was a paper yesterday that did a good job at that. So maybe it would be helpful. So the third comment is on the duration of training and content. So the duration of the program was around 6 sessions, 2 hours long each, and they were spread across 2 weeks. There is feedback from the students that perhaps the training duration was short and maybe they need more time to implement the stuff that was taught to them. So here I was thinking maybe 2 things could be helpful. Firstly, providing a rationale for why the duration was chosen, why 2 weeks. And then if you compare it with other training programs, the duration of other training programs, and benchmark this duration of your training program with them, then I think that will also help us understand if this time duration was sufficient. So timing of the experiment, last comment. So the Bribery experiment was launched in July 2021, I believe, which is around 2 months after the training program and 1 month after the midnight survey. In the paper you mentioned that there were some delays in responding to the email that was sent to them due to the summer holiday, and then the respondents that did not respond to the email, they were called to remind them about the survey experiment. So I was thinking that gives you 2 sets of people, early responders versus late responders, and I think the idea of sending them email in the first place was to avoid experimental rebound effects. So that also distinguishes these 2 groups, early responders versus late responders, on that dimension. The first one had lower experimental rebound effects than the later one more. So maybe you can see how the effects for these 2 different sets of people differ. Maybe there's also the training effect distributed over time, so maybe that would be helpful to investigate if you split the sample this way. And then the conclusion, I believe overall it's valuable contribution to anti-corruption strategies. There is scope to expand to other fields other than law. Given that there has been some time to this intervention, maybe you can capture some real-world outcomes now for these students and see if there is, even qualitatively, if there is an effect in their behavior in the real world. So overall, it was the paper lays ground for ethical training in professional curriculum. So I believe that's really a great finding. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to now should take a few questions, please.
Well, thanks. I can start responding here. So thanks so much, Sarah, for your detailed feedback, which is super. Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks. Super spot on. Yeah. So the problem of small sample sizes, unfortunately, attrition was a big problem at all the stages actually. So if in order to capture significant results, we would have needed a sample, we would have needed at least 900 registrations at first, which we didn't manage to achieve. So we managed to get this initial sample of 500 registrations, and 242 were assigned to the training offer, and 252, which was the other number that created some confusion, was the control group, so the group that didn't receive the offer to do the training. Okay, so this is one thing, definitely super valuable for your suggestion about making some adjustments also, for example, differential nutrition or looking at the differences effects between early respondents and late respondents in the experiment. Definitely all noted. I will make sure to work on these things to improve further the analysis. And definitely real-world outcomes. Ukraine right now, it's probably not the right context to go to the field, unfortunately. But definitely corruption is one of those phenomena that are really hard to measure in real life due to the clandestine nature of this phenomenon. So that's why a lot of experimentalists started working and studying in the lab or online experiments. But I think the qualitative insights will also help, get a much better picture also of why the mechanisms work in that way. So thanks so much.
Thank you. For these responses, I assured you that in terms of the findings of the paper, there will be many public sector training organizations who will be looking at this. So, any questions, please? Observations, clarifications? Ma'am, please.
Thank you for
Thanks, this is really valuable work. So the law school is 2 years?
Sorry?
The law school is 2 years?
No, 5.
Oh.
So the first year students with the youngest cohort was first year, and the older cohort was between 2 and 5th year of studies. Yeah.
That's still a small age difference, even though I'm happy that you're detecting some effects, but I would just rule out that the older students are not maybe taking tests or something because we wish they go to the training, or that there's differential attrition across the age groups or differential compliance, like I was saying. So that would be nice to rule
It's a
out.
very good point. Due to sample size, we couldn't really see differential effects of each year, for example, so that's why we kind of aggregated 7 to 5 year students. But it's a good point. We kind of wanted to kind of diversify between those students that were still not embedded in the corrupt academic culture typical of the context, so the first year students that have not really interacted with university yet, whereas all the other students were already kind of used to the environment, so that's why this was the main reason of why.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, but yeah,
But
just in order to make sure that's the story, you can
Absolutely.
just make sure that compliance is equal across your two groups and that nothing else is going on.
Definitely, good point, thanks.
Yes. Please, madam.
I'm just sort of curious, like what happens with the students that between sort of being, like almost naive, innocent newbies in the first year, how they're responding so differently, and then what's sort of changing once they're getting into even just the second year, is it just like, I don't know, they become more cynical
Exactly. I really think it's a little bit of a matter of, they kind of become a little bit more skeptical, potentially, and this is something that really happens in all corrupt environments. If you see that around you, you have a lot of people engaged in corruption, you definitely get a little bit skeptical about the potential opportunity to kind of change things. And from this study, I think it was very clear that for first year students, it was kind of important to conform to the norm, or at least the perceived norm as expressed by the information treatment. Whereas older students, and actually we see it also in society, adults kind of probably care less about conforming to the norm. So probably this is also why older students didn't really engage in behavior change.
I think, and this was one of the most definitely very different and very unique in terms of using both these dimensions of looking at the integrity and how does the training impact that. So I hope and I believe that in light of these observations, and we definitely, for my organization, the Civil Services Academy, we would like to use the findings, the conclusions out of that to design a customized training program for public officials in Pakistan because we have the challenge at multiple levels, and we would like to work with you and your lead researchers in this regard. So best wishes and good luck
Thanks.
for this.
Thanks a lot. We will be
Sarah.
definitely honored. And maybe as a result of the paper, just to say, definitely it's important to do integrity training. Capacity building is probably one of the most common tools for behavior change, but it's kind of clear that training is not enough, it needs to be complemented. And for example, needs to be complemented, for example, with a very wide, nationwide communication campaign or education campaign that really kind of explains and shows people that the norm is changing. So this is definitely my suggestion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Farhan, Khwaja, and Ms. Nikita and Ms. Sarah. Now we will have a short tea break, and after that we will reconvene shortly.